Hello everyone, thank you for returning to the channel. Today, I bring you a special episode in the series about James and Diep, along with their 4-year-old adopted daughter, Little Nee. In this episode, we follow what seems like a peaceful moment in their lives, until the sky suddenly darkens and the ground begins to shake. An unexpected earthquake strikes without warning, giving them not even a second to prepare. The question that leaves everyone holding their breath is this: will James, Diep, and Little Nee escape the grip of death in time? Can they stay strong in the midst of chaos, and after everything, will they still have the strength to rebuild what they have poured their hearts into? Join me as we step into this emotional and suspenseful story. That early morning, the city still carried its familiar peaceful look, as if the whole world was slowly waking up after a long night. Dew clung to the treetops, shimmering under the first light of day, creating delicate strands of brightness like silk. The street in front of the house was still quiet, with only the distant sound of a few motorbikes mixed with the chirping of birds from familiar rooftops. The air held a gentle coolness, so fresh that it made people feel as if today would be a perfect day. In that calm moment, James, the CEO of DJ Agricultural Company, was busy preparing for his business trip to inspect the company's processing facilities. Thick stacks of documents were neatly arranged, each page reviewed with the carefulness of someone leading a large enterprise. Every movement he made was orderly and precise, reflecting the professionalism and responsibility he always carried in his work. He had no idea that just a few hours later, all his plans, his schedule, and even the peaceful life of his family would be shattered by an unexpected disaster. In the kitchen, Diep, his wife, gently placed a warm glass of milk on the table. Steam slowly rose, forming a thin mist in the air, carrying a mild sweet scent. Every movement she made was slow and tender, like a habit formed since the day they became a family. "Take care of yourself on your trip," she said, her voice soft yet filled with the worry she always tried to hide. Her eyes followed James as if her intuition was trying to warn her of something vague but unsettling. Suddenly, the sound of tiny footsteps echoed across the wooden floor, breaking the gentle silence. Little Nee, their 4-year-old adopted daughter, came running from the living room with her usual excitement. Her tiny legs moved so quickly that her small dress fluttered with every step. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around James's leg and looked up, her round face shining. Her bright black eyes sparkled, and her smile was so pure that just seeing it felt like the whole world had softened. "Daddy, you must come back to me," she said in her cheerful little voice, making the whole house feel warmer. James bent down and patted her head, while Diep watched the two of them with affection in her eyes. The atmosphere in their home was so warm that it made people believe no challenge could ever tear them apart. A perfect morning. A moment that felt like it could last forever. A family full of love and peace. But peace is sometimes the quiet warning before a disaster no one is prepared for. No one knew that this warm moment was only the soft opening to the terrifying storm waiting ahead. When James arrived at the northern factory zone, the morning sunlight was still softly reflecting off the metal roofs. The industrial area carried the familiar scent of freshly processed agricultural products, mixed with the steady hum of machinery and the voices of workers exchanging instructions. Everything was so calm that James felt unusually reassured, knowing that the entire production line was running exactly as scheduled. He walked slowly along the main hallway, speaking with managers while observing each section of the machinery he had invested so much effort and capital into building. The conveyor belts moved steadily, the mechanical arms operated in smooth rhythm, as if the entire factory was breathing in sync with him. In that moment, even someone as cautious as James had no idea that just seconds later, everything would collapse. A violent explosion-like sound suddenly erupted from deep underground, tearing through the air. James turned around, startled, but before he could ask anyone anything, the ground beneath him began to shake. At first it felt like a small tremor, but it quickly turned into powerful jolts that nearly knocked him off his feet. In an instant, the entire factory fell into chaos. The concrete buildings around him shook violently, windows rattling as if ready to break. The towering steel production lines tilted to one side, metal pieces clashing together with a deafening, chilling sound. Overhead, pipes and industrial lights swung wildly, with some crashing to the ground and shattering. From the warehouse behind him came sharp cracking sounds, like the bones of a giant snapping under pressure. The solid wall the company once prided itself on began to split open, forming jagged cracks that spread at frightening speed. Large stacks of goods toppled over, crashing violently onto the floor. Bags of processed crops spilled out, sliding across the quaking ground. Workers who had been calmly focusing on their tasks moments before were suddenly thrown into panic. Some ran, others fell, some held their heads and screamed in fear. The cries for help, the sound of collapsing equipment, and the shriek of twisting metal fused into a terrifying roar that James had never imagined he would experience in his life. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the nearest group of workers, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Everyone outside now, go to the open area, move quickly, do not go back for anything." Dust and wind stung his eyes, forcing him to squint, but he continued scanning every direction, determined not to leave anyone behind. Thick clouds of dust rose from the widening cracks in the concrete, reducing visibility to only a few meters. Each step he took was met with another violent jolt of the ground that nearly sent him collapsing. Only a few minutes passed, yet to James, it felt like a nightmare stretched into eternity. When the tremors finally eased, he looked around, and the entire production area was unrecognizable. Part of the warehouse had collapsed, the roof twisted and bent. The production line, once the pride of the company, now lay broken and leaning. Machines worth millions of dollars were shattered across fractured concrete. Everything he had built over years had vanished in an instant. Standing in the middle of the destruction, James felt his heart tighten painfully. But his greatest fear was not the loss of the factory. It was one question that tore through his mind. Were Diep and little Nie safe? When James returned to the main headquarters, he immediately sensed the chaos spreading through the entire building. Employees who were usually calm, orderly, and professional were now running through the hallways with panic on their faces. Alarm sirens echoed non-stop, pounding like the terrified heartbeat of the entire company. The moment he stepped into the operations room, James froze at the sight before him. The desks of the managers were covered with ringing phones, laptops flashing constant system error alerts. The faint smell of dust and burned circuit boards from damaged equipment filled the air, making the atmosphere even heavier. From the communication radios, the voices of managers at the factories came through in fragmented, static-filled bursts. Warehouse number 3, part of the wall collapsed. The drying area, the roof is gone, the dryer is tilting, it might fall. The inventory storage, everything is buried, we cannot determine the total damage yet. Each report felt like a stab to the heart of the person responsible for all of it. James turned sharply toward the surveillance screens on the wall. The camera footage made his breath catch. Main warehouse, the metal roof was crushed and bent like foil, and a large section of the wall had collapsed into a pile of rubble as high as a person. Agricultural drying area, the entire roof was broken, sunlight shining directly on a chaotic scene below, exposing destruction beyond repair. Raw material yard, hundreds of tons of agricultural goods were now mixed with dirt and debris, many parts completely buried. The sound of staff quietly crying blended with others trying to steady their voices as they reported updates, making the room feel several tons heavier. James stood at the center of that storm of panic, his face still dirty with dust from escaping the factory. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the helplessness threatening to take over his thoughts. But he was the CEO. The leader. He could not collapse. James took a deep breath, forcing back the panic tightening his chest. He raised his hand for silence, then spoke firmly. Begin the emergency recovery protocol immediately. Prioritize rescuing people and checking structural safety. Equipment and materials come after. Move in teams. No one acts alone. His voice was hoarse and exhausted, yet strong enough to pull the entire team back from the brink of fear. Even though he felt broken inside, even though his body was worn down after surviving the factory collapse, James had to stay standing. Because at that moment, hundreds of people were looking to him for direction, waiting for him to lead them through a disaster unlike anything they had ever faced. Amid the ruined streets, where dust had not yet settled and the sound of rescue vehicles echoed non-stop, Diep ran as quickly as she could while holding little Nie tightly in her arms. The smoke and dust made her breath heavy, but her steps remained steady and strong. Her arm shielded Nie's head while she whispered again and again. "It is okay, I am here." When she arrived at DJ headquarters, the scene before her was pure chaos. People were rushing in and out, each carrying fear and panic on their faces. But Diep did not let the turmoil overwhelm her. She took a deep breath, handed little Nie to a trusted employee, and hurried into the operations room where James was directing everything under intense pressure. The moment James saw his wife and daughter, his eyes reddened with relief. But he had no time to embrace them, no matter how much he wanted to. The situation was too severe, and an emergency meeting had to begin immediately. Inside the room filled with alarms and non-stop reports, the couple stood side by side, calmly assigning responsibilities. James took charge of overseeing rescue operations at the damaged factories, assessing damage to production lines, warehouses, and partner farms, developing immediate technical recovery plans. Diep handled communicating with the media and partners to prevent harmful rumors, reassuring employees who were terrified, explaining losses and negotiating with major clients to delay deliveries. Despite the chaos swallowing the company, the two of them remained side by side like pillars in the heart of a storm. They exchanged a look that needed no words. "We will get through this together." 1 week passed. A week that felt like an entire year. Every day, James stayed awake until dawn, traveling across collapsed areas to inspect damage. Diep held continuous meetings with partners, reassured departments, and maintained morale for the staff. Little Nie was unusually quiet, sometimes only sitting with her crayons, drawing pictures of their family, as if she, too, sensed the weight crushing her parents. And then, the day they feared most arrived. In the meeting room, the finance department presented the latest report. No one spoke. No one smiled. No one even breathed loudly. The head of sales slowly stood up. His voice trembled, breaking with each word. "Our emergency funds are only enough for the company to survive 7 more days." The entire room fell silent. The numbers on the screen kept shifting, but everyone saw only one truth: without money, the entire DJ system would collapse. James's face darkened instantly. Exhaustion, defeat, helplessness, everything crashed down on him again. Looking at the damage report, he understood clearly. The factories needed repairs. The machinery needed replacement. The spoiled agricultural goods required compensation. The workers needed wages to survive the crisis. Everything required enormous funds, funds the company no longer had. In the rising wave of despair, James turned to his wife. His voice was so small it sounded like he was afraid to hear it himself. "Diep, maybe this time. I cannot save the company." At that moment, his heart felt crushed. Not because of money. Not because of the destroyed property. But because he felt he had failed his wife and child. Little Nie stood beside the meeting table, her big round eyes staring at her parents, not understanding what was happening. She tugged gently on James's sleeve and looked up with her clear gaze. "Daddy, do not be sad." Just that one tiny sentence was enough to make James's heart ache sharply. The heavy meeting room door slowly opened, the faint sound of its hinges enough to make everyone inside turn their heads. In the suffocating atmosphere created by the alarming red numbers on the financial report, the quiet figure of James's mother appeared, slow but steady. She stepped inside with her familiar simplicity, an old faded sweater, her silver hair neatly tied behind her head. But what silenced the entire room was not her appearance. It was the old savings book she held in her hands. The cover was worn, its corners creased as if it had followed her through an entire lifetime. No one spoke. James's mother walked to the center of the table and placed the savings book in front of him. Her movement was gentle, yet the sound of the book touching the table rang clearly enough to make everyone in the crowded room feel breathless. Her voice was warm, deep, and full of love. "This is the money I have saved my whole life. I am not wealthy, but I believe in you. Use it to save the company, and protect our family." The meeting room that had been filled with tension just moments ago fell into complete silence. James stared at the savings book, then lifted his gaze to his mother. In her eyes, there was no hesitation, no fear, only unconditional love and absolute faith in her son. His throat tightened as if something heavy was pressing against it. His shoulders, weighed down for days by responsibility, trembled slightly. He had signed million-dollar contracts, remained calm in front of hundreds of people, led a corporation through crisis. But in this moment, he could not find a single word to say. He had never seen his mother look so resolute. Little Nie ran from the corner of the room, her tiny feet pattering across the floor as she wrapped her arms around her grandmother's legs. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice clear and soft like a drop of water falling into the heart. James's mother bent down to stroke her hair, and her gentle smile warmed the cold, despair-filled room. Standing behind them, Diep's hands trembled. She tried to hold back tears, but they still rolled down her cheeks, tears not of weakness, but of a wife who had watched her husband fall deeper into hopelessness, only to see him lifted back up by a mother's unconditional love. James took a deep breath. He placed his hand on the savings book, his large hand almost covering the small, fragile object his mother had spent a lifetime building. In that moment, he understood something simple yet powerful. He could not give up. Not when his mother believed in him this much. Not when his wife stood beside him. Not when his daughter needed a father who would stay strong. The fear that had piled up from the earthquake, the company's destruction, the bleak future. All of it seemed to lighten. Inside him, a new flame ignited, not one born from business instinct, but from love and responsibility. Just one moment. But it was enough for James to know. He must rise. He must fight until the very end. The next day, while James was still buried in unfinished restoration plans and the overwhelming red numbers threatening the company's survival, the secretary suddenly rushed in and announced an urgent call from an international organization specializing in post-disaster reconstruction. James and Diep immediately answered the call. On the other end of the line was the steady voice of the organization's representative. After confirming the situation, he said, "We have been following reports about DJ Company throughout the earthquake. We highly appreciate your transparency, your sense of responsibility, and the way you protected your workers. If DJ is willing to join the agricultural reconstruction project in the affected region, we will provide financial support, agricultural experts, and the necessary technical equipment. The offer, arriving at the perfect moment, felt like a shining light piercing through the long, dark days of despair James and Diep had endured. They looked at each other. No words were needed. Both understood this was the opportunity to save DJ. From that moment on, the concept of rest no longer existed for them. James worked from before sunrise until long after the city was asleep, leading engineering teams to reinforce every cracked or collapsed factory structure, inspecting machinery piece by piece to ensure absolute safety, overseeing the evaluation of agricultural quality after the disaster, coordinating emergency support with damaged farms. Diep matched his efforts with unwavering resolve, working continuously with the international organization to secure funding and specialists, directing the communications team to publish transparent updates, rebuilding partner trust, supporting affected farming groups to stabilize their production, keeping employee morale steady and preventing panic within the company. Every night, they returned home exhausted, their clothes stained with dust and fatigue. But the moment they saw Little Nee smile, they found another reason to keep fighting the next day. With cooperation from local authorities, international experts, and the extraordinary determination of hundreds of DJ employees, the devastated areas slowly came back to life. Cracked fields were plowed again and covered with fresh green. Collapsed factory buildings gradually rose upright once more. Production lines that seemed lost were reassembled and tested. The first trucks of agricultural goods left the warehouse again, slowly, but filled with hope. DJ Company, once on the brink of collapse, was now finding its footing again, like a resilient tree rising from ashes after a storm. James looked around, seeing employees working with renewed energy, machines coming back to life, and hope shining in his wife's eyes. And he knew they were finally on the right path. After exactly 30 days, what had once been ruins across the city and its agricultural regions had begun to take shape again. Roads that were split open were repaired, residential areas lit up once more after nights of darkness. On the fields torn apart by the earthquake, new green sprouts pushed through the soil, fragile but determined, just like the people who lived there. DJ Company, once on the brink of collapse, was not only revived but became a symbol of humanity in crisis. The media spoke of them with admiration. A business that dared to present transparent reports of its damages. A team that did not abandon farmers in their most difficult time. A leadership family who placed people above everything else. People praised DJ, but James knew clearly. The company survived not because of luck. Not because of financial aid or public compliments. It survived because of love, trust, and the quiet sacrifices of the people he treasured most. On the day of the final press conference, the hall was packed. Dozens of cameras turned toward James as he stepped up to the podium. His black suit could not hide the exhaustion etched into him after 30 days of fighting, but in his eyes was something stronger than fatigue, proof of a belief fulfilled. James looked across the room and began to speak, his voice deep and steady. We lost a great deal. But we never lost faith. Because of the love of my family and the unity of everyone around us. We stood back up after the disaster. The hall fell silent. Not because he used dramatic words, but because everyone knew that every sentence came from tears, sweat, and pain, things only those who lived through the storm could understand. James looked toward the seats in front. Diep was there, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes red but glowing with pride. Little Nee sat beside her, holding her old teddy bear, smiling at her father as if she had watched every moment of his struggle. And James's mother, The humble woman whose lifetime savings had saved the company, looked at him with a peaceful gaze, the gaze of someone who believed her son had overcome the greatest trial of his life. In that moment, no other words were needed. They all understood that day. What carries people through their greatest storms is not money. It is not luck. It is love, sacrifice, and faith in one another. Stay tuned for the next video to follow the new journey of James and Diep. After rising from the ashes, what challenges will await them next?
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người video tiếp theo về câu chuyện của James và Diep nha mọi người. Hiện tại thì mình đang tạo và chỉnh sửa ảnh thumbnail cũng chưa có hoàn thành đó mọi người. Cảm ơn mọi người đã theo dõi video của mình nha. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau. Tạm biệt mọi người.
Ngàn đô là hết nhiêu tiền rồi?